Welcome back. South Texas Crime Stories releasing a new episode yesterday, and this week's podcast all about a case that many of you are familiar with. It angered so many just a few years ago, 2019, the disappearance and death of 8-month-old King Jay Davila.
And co-host of South Texas Crime Stories, Hernandez, joins us now, along with Dillon, Collier, who was also part of this episode. Good morning, guys.
Hey, good morning.
Thanks for joining us.
So first and foremost, Erica, obviously this is a really well-covered event. We've talked about it extensively, the whole process from disappearance to, the trial. Why did you guys do this episode?
I think just for that reason, it was one that everybody remembered. And I know for me, and probably for a lot of us who covered it, it's one that we won't forget. And I think bringing Dillon along, who did a lot of the news coverage for this case, was just, it was easy for him to ask him to do this episode with Lee and I.
And Dillon, you're here. You touched on it a bit in the episode, but talk more about how you got involved in the case and the breaking news about the staged kidnapping.
Yeah, I really stepped in when it became an investigation into what Chris Davila knew and whether he had conspired with family members to hide the body of King Jay, which ended up being the case. We were able to get some of the search warrant information pretty early on, and then of course the arrest warrant for Chris Davila when he led police to little King Jay's body that had been buried in a field. So, an unfortunate situation, and sadly kind of the continuation of a trend in Bexar County where we see harm done to children and then acts that are done to sort of conceal that type of behavior.
And, you kind of mentioned it. This is one of the first times you saw so much outrage from the community. And, they were actually helping the media. They were giving you a lot of tips.
Yeah, I mean, this was a situation where a number of searches of homes were done before Chris Davila was officially charged. He was the first to be charged out of that group. And we knew where these searches were taking place. And except in very high profile situations, a search warrant is usually carried out without the public or the media able to sort of watch it. And that was not the case with this situation. We knew where these houses were. We were able to have news coverage while the searches took place. And that's really not something that you see very often.
And Erica, where does the case stand currently for the 3 arrested?
As far as for the court standpoint, Angie Torres, she took a plea deal for 8 years. Christopher Davila took a plea deal last year for 40 years. We are still waiting on Beatriz Sampaio, which is his mother, who was also part of the staged kidnapping. Right now, she is scheduled for trial next month. We'll see if that happens or she takes a last-minute plea deal.
All right. And for anyone watching, in case they don't know, how can people go about downloading and listening to the podcast?
Yeah, so it's pretty easy. You go on Apple or Spotify podcast. If we made it even easier, you can go to ksat.com. You can hit the QR code there, and it'll take you directly to the embed of the podcast as well.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. And of course, Erica and Lee, who's joining you on the podcast, they're going to be back next week. The next episode, San Antonio Strangler. Not going to want to miss it.
That's right. Thanks, guys, for joining us again.